All right, nervous system infections. Let's do this. You gave us tons of notes and stuff. Even microbiology, Q&A 26, nervous system infections. Big exam coming up, or just love the brain?
Well, either way, good timing because, yeah, microbiology, it's a lot sometimes, all those terms.
Right. It's like its own language. Speaking of which, that question about the brain's outer membrane, I saw alma mater as a choice.
Ah, textbook writers trying to be funny.
Got to keep us on our toes, I guess.
Yeah.
But seriously, the brain and spinal cord are important. So they've
Yeah.
got to have good protection now.
Absolutely. And that's where the blood-brain barrier comes in. It's not just a wall, though.
It's not.
Nope. More like a really picky bouncer, deciding what gets into the brain and what stays out.
So it's not just about keeping the bad stuff out then.
Right. It lets the good stuff in, too, like nutrients and oxygen, but it keeps out most bacteria, toxins, all the bad stuff.
Wow.
And this barrier, it's made of special cells, and they form these super tight junctions.
So nothing gets through.
Well, it makes it really hard for anything unwanted to sneak in.
Makes sense. I'm thinking about those neuron diagrams, from the fill in the blanks, all the axons and dendrites.
Yeah.
Really shows you how important it is to protect all those connections,
Definitely. Neurons are kind of the messengers of the nervous system, sending information all over your body. They need a really specific balance to work right.
Like if that gets messed up,
Then you can have some serious problems.
so we've got this fortress brain protected by this amazing blood-brain barrier.
Right.
But I'm guessing nothing is perfect, right?
Unfortunately not. Things can still get in. And that's when we start talking about infections. Your notes actually had a question about this. The one about those meningitis outbreaks on college campuses.
Oh, yeah.
Which bacteria causes that?
Let me think. It's Neisseria meningitis.
Exactly. And that's a classic example of a bacteria that can cause some serious trouble.
Meningitis, right. That's the infection of the meninges, the membranes that protect the brain and spinal cord.
Right.
Sounds pretty scary.
It can be. Bacterial meningitis often starts with fever, a stiff neck, and a bad headache, but it can get worse really fast. Confusion, seizures, even coma. It's serious.
Wow.
But the good news is we have vaccines for some of the most common causes, like for Bacterial Meningitis.
Okay, that's good. My notes mentioned some other bacteria too, like Haemophilus influenza and Streptococcus. Are those just as bad?
They can be, yeah. Especially for newborns and little kids. Haemophilus influenza, especially type B, used to be a really big cause of bacterial meningitis in kids. But luckily, vaccines have made a huge difference.
That's good.
And then there's Streptococcus pneumonia, another common one, also mainly a problem for young children. Oh, and Streptococcus agalactia group B strep. That one's a big concern for newborns because they can get infected during birth or right after.
It's kind of heartbreaking that these bacteria seem to go after the littlest ones, Makes you realize how important prevention is and vaccines. But those Clostridium bacteria, those caught my eye.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they seem different.
They are a bit different. They produce some of the most powerful neurotoxins we know of, the ones that cause botulism and tetanus.
Neurotoxins. Those are the things that let neurons talk to each other, right?
Well, they're the chemical messengers, yeah. Neurons use them to communicate.
So these toxins mess that up.
Basically. And it can cause all sorts of problems. Depends on the specific toxin. Like botulism toxin causes paralysis. And tetanus toxin, that's what causes those really painful muscle spasms.
Well,
You might know it better as lockjaw.
wait, that's tetanus.
Got
I
it.
had no idea that was from a bacterial toxin. So with Clostridium, it's not just the bacteria themselves that are the problem, it's the toxins too.
Right, it's like a double attack.
So the treatment is antibiotics for the bacteria.
Yep, and antitoxins to neutralize the toxins. Got to stop them before they can do more damage.
Wow. This is all fascinating, but kind of scary too. You don't realize how vulnerable the nervous system is.
It is vulnerable, yeah, even with all its defenses, which is why it's so important to keep those defenses strong and to see a doctor right away if you think something's wrong. But for now, let's move on to another type of invader, viruses. They might be tiny, but they can cause some big problems. So, viral infections of the nervous system. What do you need to know? Well, viruses are sneaky. They're really good at infecting. Let's start with viral meningitis. It's actually more common than the bacterial kind.
Really?
Yeah. But usually it's not as bad. Lots of different viruses can cause it. But one group that comes up a lot is arboviruses.
Arboviruses, are those the mosquito ones?
Oh, spread through mosquito bites. And you find different types in different parts of the world. Most of the time, arbovirus infections are mild, just like having the flu.
Okay.
But sometimes they can be much more serious.
Yeah, that reminds me of all the Zika stuff a few years ago. That sounded pretty scary, especially for pregnant women.
Zika, that's a perfect example of an arbovirus that can have really serious consequences, even though for most people the symptoms are pretty mild. But for pregnant women,
Yeah.
that's where the real danger is. Zika infection during pregnancy can cause microcephaly in babies.
Microcephaly. That's where the baby's head is too small, right?
Right, and it can cause developmental problems, all sorts of health issues. It was a big worry, especially in places where Zika was spreading.
My bad.
Luckily, the number of cases has gone down a lot in recent years.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears completely for a second. Prions. I've got a question in my notes here. It says, diseases that don't require foreign nucleic acid. What does that even mean? What are prions?
Prions are weird. They're not like bacteria or viruses. Prions are misfolded proteins. And get this, they can actually spread, and they cause these horrible brain diseases.
Misfolded proteins.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that something so tiny could be so dangerous.
I know, right? But that's what makes them so scary. Prions can actually change normal proteins in the brain. They turn them into more prions. It's like a chain reaction.
So they're like taking over healthy cells,
Yeah.
turning them into copies of themselves. Sounds like science fiction.
It does, doesn't it? And the diseases they cause, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, those are terrifying. CJD causes dementia, loss of coordination, and it's always fatal. There's no cure.
Wow. Are there other prion diseases besides CJD?
There are, yeah. Kuru is another one. Used to be pretty common in Papua New Guinea because of a ritual they had there.
What kind of ritual?
They would eat the brains of people who had died, and that's how Kuru spread.
Oh, wow. Okay, so back to things that are maybe a little more familiar. What about those fungal and parasitic infections? They don't seem to get as much attention as the other nervous system infections.
You're right, they don't. But they're still important to understand, especially for people with weaker immune systems. For them, fungal and parasitic infections can be just as bad as any of the others we've talked about.
So they're kind of like waiting for the right moment to strike when the body's defenses are down.
Exactly. Let's start with the fungal infections. Those are called neuromycoses. They're especially dangerous for people who are immunocompromised because their bodies can't fight off the fungi as well.
So basically, if your immune system is weak, it's easier to get any kind of infection.
Right. And with neuromycosis, there's another problem. That blood-brain barrier we talked about before, it makes treatment really difficult because a lot of the antifungal medications can't get past that barrier. They can't reach the infection in the brain.
So it's like a double whammy. The infection is worse in people with weak immune systems, and it's harder to treat because of the blood-brain barrier.
Exactly. So the treatment often takes a long time, and the medications have to be given in low doses to try to minimize side effects but still get past that barrier.
That's tough.
Amphotericin B is often the drug they use, but it can have some pretty serious side effects.
Yikes. I can see why those fungal infections have such a high mortality rate.
Yeah. Finding good treatments for those is a big challenge. Treatments that can reach the brain without causing too many other problems. Okay, let's switch gears again. Parasites. Ever heard of Naegleria fowleri?
Oh, yeah. That's the brain-eating amoeba, right?
Yep, that's the one. And it's not just a scary story. People actually get infected with it, usually from swimming in warm freshwater lakes and rivers. That's where this amoeba lives.
So you can get infected just from swimming.
It enters through your nose and then travels up the olfactory nerve all the way to the brain.
That's terrifying.
And the infection, it's called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. It's incredibly serious, almost always fatal. It moves fast. Headache, fever, stiff neck, seizures, then coma and death.
That's just awful.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something so tiny can be so deadly. Are there other parasites we should know about?
Yeah.
Ones that can affect the nervous system?
There are a few, yeah. African trypanosomiasis is one. You might know it as sleeping sickness.
Sleeping sickness. The name sounds bad enough.
It's caused by a parasite called Trypanosoma brucei, and it's spread by tsetse flies.
Tsetse flies, like those biting flies.
Yep, they carry the parasite. And it causes all sorts of neurological problems. Fever, headaches, confusion, and eventually it messes with your sleep patterns. That's where the name comes from.
My notes mention two different kinds of trypanosomiasis, East African and West African. Are they different?
They are, yeah. It depends on the subspecies of the parasite. The East African form is more acute. It develops really fast. The West African form is more chronic. It can take years to show up.
Wow. So the same parasite, but it can act really differently depending on where you are. That's fascinating. So is there a cure for sleeping sickness?
There is, yeah. We have some effective medications, but you have to catch it early. Early diagnosis and treatment are really important. The tricky thing is, This parasite is really good at avoiding the immune system.
How does it do that?
It does something called antigenic variation. Basically, the trypanosomes can change the proteins on their surface all the time, so the immune system has a hard time recognizing them.
So they keep changing their disguise, and the immune system can't keep up.
Pretty much. It's a really effective strategy for the parasite. It can stay in the bloodstream and keep causing damage.
That's amazing. Okay, so what about neurocysticercosis? That's the one with the tapeworm larvae, right?
You got it. It's caused by the larva of a tapeworm called Tanea solium, and people get it from eating undercooked pork.
Seriously? Tapeworms in the brain from undercooked pork.
Wow.
Okay, so what happens when these larvae get to the brain?
They form cysts, and those cysts can cause all kinds of problems, headaches, seizures, even cognitive impairment.
So is there a treatment for that?
There is. We have some antiparasitic drugs that can kill the larva, and sometimes if the cysts are really big and putting pressure on the brain, surgery might be necessary.
Wow. It's amazing that we can even diagnose and treat these kinds of infections. But how do doctors even know it's neurocysticercosis? It seems like it would be hard to figure out.
It can be tricky, yeah. They use imaging tests like CT scans or MRIs to look for the cysts in the brain, and they might do blood tests to look for antibodies to the parasite.
So it's like detective work, putting all the clues together. But I guess early diagnosis is really important, especially with something as serious as a nervous system infection.
Absolutely. Early diagnosis and treatment are key. It can prevent long-term problems and really make a difference for the patient. And this brings us back to prevention. If you know the risks and you take precautions, you can avoid a lot of these infections altogether.
That's a good point. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into nervous system infections, what are the most important things for our listeners to remember? How can they protect themselves?
Well, I think the main thing is to realize that the more you know, the better you can protect yourself. Understanding the different types of infections, how they spread, all of that, that's the first step to preventing them.
Yeah, you can't stop something if you don't even know it's there.
Right. And speaking of prevention, that's always the best approach. Get vaccinated, wash your hands, be careful about how you prepare food, take precautions when you travel. All that stuff really makes a difference.
Good advice. Okay, but what if someone thinks they might actually have a nervous system infection? What should they do?
Go see a doctor right away. Don't wait. Early diagnosis and treatment are so important. Don't try to figure it out yourself.
Got it. See a professional.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been a lot, from how the brain protects itself to all the things that can cause infections. We've talked about bacteria, viruses, prions, even fungi and parasites, nervous system infections. There's a lot to them.
There is. It's a whole world. It can be kind of scary to think about all the things that are out there,
Yeah.
but it's also good to remember that we know a lot about them now, and we have ways to protect ourselves.
That's true. This deep dive has been, well, fascinating, a little freaky, but I definitely feel like I've learned a lot. It makes you realize how amazing the brain is,
It really is.
but also how vulnerable it can be.
Definitely. It's a good reminder to take care of it.
I agree. Thanks for taking the time to walk us through all of this. It's been awesome.
No problem. Glad to be here.
All right, everyone. That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.